All right. Well, we will call this special meeting of the Stillwater City Council to order. We will jump right in with item 1 on our agenda. So, gentlemen, I'm not sure who's starting.
Well, I met most of you. I'm Ron Hollifield with SGR. I spent about 20 years as a city manager before starting SGR back in about '99. Prior to that, I also did a stint running the innovation groups for the middle part of the United States and we've got about 550 client cities in 47 states, including Stillwater. And Stillwater is one of the places we have an office here. Gary lives here, and so we're proud to be sort of the hometown team here. So appreciate the opportunity for us to get to do some thinking out loud with you. Let me tell you that I work with cities all over the U.S., and I just think what you guys are thinking about is the coolest thing in the world. I mean, this is really, really awesome that you're doing some big, bold thinking, because the reality is the pace of change that we're dealing with is so profound, it's really difficult to lead towards the future looking into the rearview mirror. And yet that's what an awful lot of cities do. So I think it's awesome that you're really thinking out of the box with this. So here's my goal today for you, is that I want to push you up to the 30,000 foot level. Forget about focusing on what a person looks like. And we really want to focus on what are you trying to accomplish. Will Rogers said that one of the problems is people come up with solutions with answers before they know what the question is. And so what I want to help you do is push your focus to a higher level initially, and let's focus on what the questions are. What are you really trying to accomplish? And then let that trickle downward instead of starting out with, here's what it ought to look like, and then let's figure out why we're doing it. Does that make sense? So as we jump into this, let me encourage you to to question, to challenge, whatever. Gary has done a ton of research in advance. We're going to pull him in off and on as we go through it. He has visited with a lot of futurist programs, trying to really understand what all the implications and some practical considerations and such are, and we'll incorporate that at the appropriate time. Let me first, let's start off, and some of this is going to feel like, what does that have to do with this in the beginning? And yet it actually is going to be really, really critical to going down a journey to get you to the point of making great final decisions. So let me ask you this first. What do you see as the major operational drivers for the future of Stillwater? What are the big things that are going to determine your future? What are the things that are going to drive what your future is? And I realize I'm hitting you cold with some stuff you probably have not actually sat and thought through before.
When you say drivers, you mean like economic development possibilities, current?
Yeah. So if you looked back today, 25 years ago, there are some things that happened that determined what you are today. They may have been good, may have been bad. These are not what you want them to be. They're not value driven. They're just getting your arms around reality. So at some point way back in the past, OSU was a huge driver. A decision got made that caused OSU to locate here that then became a huge driver. With that driver, there's good stuff and there's challenging stuff, but the fact that it occurred is a huge driver. So what are the things that are going to drive you? What's going to shape your future? What are the big flows of things?
Well, I think healthcare is one of them, with Stillwater Medical Center being our second largest employer.
Okay.
I'm going to say continued growth and expansion of Oklahoma State University campus, both with enrollment and.
Okay.
I'm attempting to narrow down all of the possibilities. There's all kinds of stuff that we're going to see economic development-wise, currently with incentives around core redevelopment that we're working on. So economic development in the core is going to be a big driver.
Okay.
Changing transportation, changing modes of transportation.
Okay.
I think energy and technology.
Okay.
Are we going outside of?
No. That's awesome, but it needs to be, in other words, instead of just something loosey-goosey, I don't mean that sounds critical, I don't mean it that way, but energy and technology is just kind of amorphous. What is it that specifically is going to, so for example, we know specifically there are trends with transportation modes that are absolutely on the horizon.
I think as a city that has their own utilities and things, so I think energy and some of the changing not modes of energy, but the changing ways in which we might look at energy, whether it's sustainable,
Okay.
and things like that.
All right.
That's a huge driver for us.
West Texas looks profoundly different today driving down the highways because of the wind turbines than it did even 10 years ago.
And then technology, one of the things that we're looking at right now is whether or not we would expand our utilities to include broadband service. And we know more globally, our technology is changing with 5G and things like that as well, which will shape our city differently perhaps.
I was assistant city manager in Plano when we did a big tax abatement for Fujitsu to build a fax machine factory. The fax machines were obsolete before the tax abatement wore out. We are in this dynamic of unbelievable change, and that's actually just part of the driver is the change itself. I mean, you're right. We can't even quite keep up with it. What else?
Well, the bean counter has to talk about revenue.
Okay.
And,
Are you the bean counter?
well, one of them.
Revenue challenges.
Revenue challenges. As you probably are aware, Oklahoma is the only state in the union that does not allow
Yes.
municipalities access to ad valorem for operations.
Yeah.
And with increasing costs of infrastructure maintenance, it becomes a challenge.
Okay. Anything else? Operational drivers.
I think technology's effect on citizen involvement and citizen communication with their government. is,
Access,
Yeah.
To that, I'll just add government as a whole, larger legislatures, or legislatures above ours.
Okay, anything else? And it's not so much that we're getting a defined, all-in, comprehensive. It's really, let's getting into our thinking a little bit as we get a little further down the road. So the second question, so that's operational drivers. So the second question is, what are your reputational drivers? In other words, what's going to shape Stillwater's reputation? What is it about Stillwater that's going to determine who wants to live here or who wants to locate their business here and who doesn't? Not all growth is created equal. When I was city manager in Farmersville, we had a company wanted to build a horse rendering plant in the middle of town. Had jobs, had tax base, wasn't what we wanted to be known for. Does that make sense? So what is it, what are your reputation, and again, it may be good or bad. This is not value driven, it's just what are the things that are going to shape your reputation for the future?
I think being a university town, that's a huge reputational driver for us.
Okay.
Well, educational with career tech and
Yeah,
university.
and, right. we have
That
several
what? What was?
We have career tech and university,
Ah.
where there's multi-facets of education.
Okay.
I'll throw the healthcare one out there again.
Absolutely.
Healthcare. Still in the wrong.
Okay. What else?
We also have it's dwindling unfortunately, but we have on North Perkins Road that manufacturing. We have a manufacturing, which is looking different. I mean, that's an area that's,
Okay.
I think our transportation, more specifically, I think air service is a reputational driver for us, or will be in the future.
Okay. I really can spell, I just can't write. What other reputational drivers?
I mean, we're kind, I don't know if this not exactly hits it, but we're kind of a town of a certain size, right? I mean, in Oklahoma, right, we don't have that many large metropolitan centers. We have kind of these mid-sized centers, and we're one of multiple of those. So we're kind of, I don't know, way to crystallize
The community
that.
feel is a reputational driver.
Okay.
It's sort of-
yeah,
Friendly college town.
there you go.
Okay. What else?
Recreational opportunities.
And a lot
Okay.
of the community feel, I mean, retirement, people are going to retire.
Okay. What else? Anything else?
Resource availability. Electric, water, sewer.
People.
Right, Justin just said the other day that sometimes we're competitive because we have those resources where we may not have some of those other things.
How we exploit new technology is going to be a big reputational driver for us, right? This idea of broadband potentially as a utility. How technologically advanced the town is going to be a big part of what draws people here in the future.
Okay.
I think the amount of commerce, or the different variety of commerce that we have in town. Chicken restaurants are always important. Got that cornered, I think.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, so with these to kind of just get your creative juices flowing a little bit, go ahead.
Just to add to that list, I know it's
Absolutely.
the reputation of the city, the city government's ease of working with and dealing with local government is a huge reputational driver.
Absolutely.
Development. That's what I'm doing.
Okay. So shift focus just a little bit now to hone in a little more on what's been percolating through all your minds. Move away from block out thinking short term, block out thinking about this is what I want this person to look like, or this is what this person ought to do. This is not about a person. We want to go to the why. Why are you even thinking about this? Does that make sense? So let's focus in just a little bit on why are you even thinking about the prospect of a futurist?
Well, we like to be proactive rather than reactive.
Okay.
improved, quality of life for our citizens.
Okay.
Government moves slowly, which means we have to be even further ahead of seizing opportunities. We've got to identify things even earlier than other organizations do.
Okay.
It probably falls under the proactive versus reactive. I think so often, when we're running our households and we're running our cities, we have a tendency to kind of deal with the day-to-day and what comes in front of us and what's on fire and, what has to be done, and the opportunity to look beyond that towards kind of new horizons and have somebody kind of designated to to think in that way. You always have to handle that day to day, but having the opportunity and the freedom to kind of think longer term, more comprehensively, to help. I think us as city council members, we're responsible for directing policy, but having a staff member that is really thinking in those long-term policy ways too, because ultimately we're kind of ephemeral, right? We're elected in and out, and it's challenging when you are in those ephemeral roles to not have somebody that's solidly in those roles, I think.
Okay. What else?
We don't have someone doing this. Right, our staff now is very capably handling day-to-day, but we don't have someone who is dedicated at looking down the road.
Okay. What else? Okay. Flip it over. Why should you not do it?
I think one of the things, I think it's a kudos to our staff. They're trying to do more with less because of budget shortfalls and because of trying to be responsible in their government roles and what they're doing and how they're doing it. And I think they're being remarkably efficient. But right, we would be adding a position, so we're filling back a position.
So competing for resources when you're too stretched to get the steel out the door right now. Okay. What else? Any other reasons not to do it?
We're not really sure what it is.
That's awesome.
That doesn't usually stop me, but.
All right. What else? Any other reasons not to do it?
I worry it'll be difficult to integrate. Is it this kind of unique role that will have it be challenging to integrate kind of holistically into how we run and work.
Okay. Any other reasons not to? Okay. Whoops. Thank you, sir. So, one of the things when I look at your why not, and particularly the staffing issue, a phrase that I would suggest you think in terms of before you make the final decision what you actually do. If adding this position simply slices the resource pie into smaller pieces, it doesn't make sense to do it. if adding this position makes the pie bigger, then it makes sense to do it. Does that make sense? That's kind of distilling down to the simplest level, but that's really your ultimate decision point, is when you start talking about the resources it takes to do it and do it well. Will that make is this just a cool thing to do, or will it make the pie bigger? That's really when you distill everything down. That's the backdrop of everything you need to be thinking in terms of. So take now and jump way out. Don't be constrained by what you have previously thought might be possible. In other words, what you've done up to this point, I don't know it, I just know it. What you've done up to this point is you've said, oh, this really has a lot of benefits. I wonder how we could pull that off inside this box. Does that make sense? Well, once you start out by being inside the box, you limit what actually can be accomplished with it. So the question I want you to get out of your box, whatever that box was. Abandon all presumptions, all conversations you've had up to this point about what it might look like. We're still kind of at the why level, except what we're going to say, we're going to shift over and go, okay, if 10 years from now, the community is looking back, about 20 years from now, let's say, if 20 years from now, the community is looking back and this is one of those reputational and operational drivers, this is a OSU located here, this is when the first hospital made a decision to open here. In other words, this is one of those things that shapes and molds your future. What does that look like? So this is not incremental. Get out of your box. This is not incremental. It's not what does it look like in a year. 20 years from now, if this is a raging success for you, what does that look like?
We were at the forefront of some new industry opportunity, sort of the beginning of the aerospace boom in Oklahoma, or some new industry that we were uniquely positioned to help bring to town.
Okay.
Because of that.
What else?
I'd like to see Stillwater be like a quality of life hub, like a recreational destination. We have the best, biking in the state, or the best youth sports, quality of life improvements.
Okay.
I don't know how to word this. I would like to see that we have provided something that the city then has an infrastructure to support itself, so that we're not, by bringing all this in, and we can have the roads we want, we can have the infrastructure, so our city can continue to run and grow with all these things we're bringing in. It'd be great to bring all these things in, but I want to make sure we have the infrastructure that will allow that to.
I also feel like this could allow us to seize, to better understand and seek out and then seize opportunities that maybe other communities are doing now that we're not doing yet.
Or that nobody's doing now. I mean, the idea that we figured out a better way to exist within the parameters we're given as a city in Oklahoma,
Right.
that we've discovered some different ways of doing things instead of just going, well, we're only allowed to get this income and we're only allowed to do these kinds of things. And we've actually, people look at Stillwater and go, man, they came up with a totally different way of doing that.
Okay. What else?
Five more neurologists.
I mean, and maybe that's kind of cliche, but I don't know that we're quite there yet, to be that community where our students want to stay when they're finished with college. And people want to retire here, and people want to, we have more holes because of our quality of life, and because of things we have, you know, in the community.
I would maybe just add to that a little bit. I think a raging success for Stillwater would see a very vibrant and strong downtown core.
And I would hope by doing all this too, that there would be more community involvement, and I don't know if that, I mean, more awareness of what as a whole.
Okay. What else?
I would like for Stillwater to be, I think, a raging success. Stillwater is recognized on a national level, on a, you know, at a much broader level as someone who has taken advantage of its unique assets, right? The university piece, you know, there are towns around like, you know, Raleigh or, you know, someplace that's got a university that's turned itself into an innovation hub or turned itself into a place where, you know, people see it as someplace who really figured out how to take their unique resource set and turn it into something new. And that,
Okay. What else? Okay, I'm going to give you a little more time to percolate on that, and I want to just give you some flow of thought reactions to everything you've said. Okay, with the drivers, and some of this will merge together and all of that, changing transportation modes, that cannot be overstated. I am looking at cars right now for a new car. Mine has 200,000 miles on it. It's time to get another one. And as I am out checking them out, they now have not only the little deal that'll jiggle when you cross the lane line, but they will jiggle if you don't keep one hand on the wheel, because the car has progressed so far, they know that it's at the point that people will start taking their hands off the wheel. There are experiments right now taking place with driverless mass transit systems, buses, not trains kind of things. Huge issue and moving at lightning speed. Changing energy industry, that is, again, profoundly significant. And there's a whole lot of folks that, I mean, everything is moving so doggone fast. And nobody really has the market cornered. Houston's got the market cornered on oil. Midland, Odessa has the market cornered on the oil patch. But nobody really has the market cornered on where the world is headed with the next generation of energy stuff, but we know it's going somewhere. Technology, expanding utilities, particularly with regard to broadband, there is probably no single more important economic development issue than access to high-speed internet. That is profoundly significant. And if you're not thinking citywide, you're not thinking about where the new workforce is, because we're in an environment that more and more people are working from home environments, and they will not stay or come if they don't have that available. Citizen involvement popped up several times in several different ways. We're absolutely seeing a transition with that. Here's the challenge you've got, is that there was a study about 2 years ago run in the Washington Post. The National Dairy Council did it. What's the population in Stillwater?
49.
49, okay. 6% of Americans believe that chocolate milk comes from brown cows. That means in Stillwater, 3,000 people in Stillwater believe chocolate milk comes from brown cows. What's happened with social media is that it has given credibility to the chocolate milk drinkers. Does that make sense? The trick is that politically, our temptation is to hunker down and to avoid I spent 20 years as city manager. I know what it's like to be at the grocery store and go down the aisle and see Miss Johnson is in the frozen food line and whip a U-turn real fast because I don't want to get jumped. I know what that's like, so I know what your world is, okay? The tendency is to whip the U-turn on the frozen food aisle and avoid interacting. Our challenge is to do a better job of listening to the whole instead of surrendering the conversation to the people who 55 years old and live in their mother's basement and spend their day on the internet trolling people. Okay? That's easy to say, hard to do. We've got to look for strategies to do a better job of listening to the 94% and not the 6%. Does that make sense? So that's a huge, this issue, it's a huge issue. Reputational drivers, university town, that came up in a variety of ways. The reality is, and in fact over here when we talked about raging success and you said, be the community that students want to stay in, that's the Austin model. What drove Austin is people went down to UT and never left. They said, this is a cool place. Now, gradually they moved out to the suburbs when they had kids and wanted a little bigger house and didn't want, but that's the Austin model. Creating an environment, the heartbeat of the town was UT, but the students wanted to stay where it was. That's profoundly significant. Let's see. Retirees. I would urge you to take a look. City of Springfield, Missouri. The former city manager, I'm drawing a blank on his last name, Greg. Greg retired as city manager and now has formed a nonprofit that is really doing great things in the community that is all about harnessing retirees. That's not hog-tying retirees, that's harnessing retirees. It's all about, you have this incredible resource of really experienced, wise, lots to offer folks that it's saying, how do we really begin to get hold of that? And it's I think what Springfield is doing is some of the leading thinking in the nation with that. It would absolutely be somebody worth talking to. Resource availability, I loved when you mentioned not just electric, water, sewer, but people. Okay, so this is not a political statement. It doesn't matter who's in power, who's not. The reason we're at full employment has almost nothing to do with government policy. It has to do with the fact that there were 75 million baby boomers, 75 million millennials, and 55 million X's and Y's. There is a trough that we knew was coming we've been talking about it for 20 years in city government, and it's here. There are not enough warm bodies. It's one of the reasons that economic development has changed in a lot of respects. If you go back 20 years ago, people went to where the jobs are. Now what's happening is companies are going where the labor force is. They're going where the employment is. They're looking for how do we meet the how do we fill available slots. Does that make sense? So you absolutely have to think about people as a resource. How do we exploit new technology? I love that. Durango, Colorado, I don't think it's the University of Colorado. One of the universities in Colorado has a campus there, and they've got a robotics lab. And they have actually taken the students in the robotics lab, took a Roomba. You know what a Roomba is? The little automated vacuum cleaner. They took a Roomba and basically cannibalized it and turned it into a silt measuring flotation device in the lakes. So now instead, in the Roomba now, instead of vacuuming the house, it is self-propelling over their primary water lake and measuring siltation and water depth and all of that used to be very, very manual. And it was cooked up literally by a bunch of kids in a robotics lab with some great teaching going on, but that did stuff that who would have thought, hey, let's go turn a Roomba into a siltation measurement device. So when you start talking about exploiting technology, a lot of it is simply mindset. It's, are you tuned in to what's going on? Some of it, which is why part of what I love what you're doing, you've all seen the little visuals where are you looking at a young girl or a old woman, the sight thing. And if you go into it looking for the old woman, you see the old woman. If you go into it looking for the young girl, you see the young girl. Once you've seen whichever one you saw, you almost can't unsee it. You know, it's locked in. That's what you're really talking about a little bit with this sense of exploiting new technology, is changing our mindset away from either or into both and. One of the challenges for people my age and older, for baby boomers, is that we tend to think in limitations. We tend to think in either or. My son, who's 23 or 4, whatever you want to do, we can do. You know, we can do it. You want a Roomba to measure the depth of the mud on the lake? Well, heck yeah, we can do that. See, there's a mind shift occurring, and that's part of what's so important. Is it's like the photograph. If you go into it with a preconception of what you're looking for, you will see what you're looking for. And so part of this is about mindset. Diverse commerce, profoundly important. You're already more diverse. There's a lot of cities that would kill for the diversity you've got, but don't take that for granted. Ease of business, doing business with the city, very, very important. And here's the challenge, and I'm not talking about, your developers are all different, I know. No, they're really not. I promise you, if I went to 20 of your developers locally, they have all gone off to the same school in Florida that teaches them how to say, you're the hardest city to do business with of every city we deal with. Every single city is the hardest city that developer has to deal with. What happens is, if you're not careful, you can swing one way or the other. You can either, due to pressure from the development community, you can basically go anything goes with what I call sell your soul for a Taco Bell, or you can become so hard-ridged people really do. You dig in. The trick is actually being easy to do business with, but not abandoning your values. Major developers are primarily looking for promptness and predictability. If they get promptness and it's not about, we want a sign that's 12 inches instead of 24 inches, or vice versa, or whatever. It's big developers, it's promptness and predictability. They want to know what the rules are. They recognize that time is money. Your mom and pops tend to be focused on wanting exceptions to the rule. And I'm not saying there's nothing illegitimate about both of those groups kind of representing their interests, but you've got to understand where they're coming from. But if you look at the patterns, big guys are looking for promptness and predictability. That is actually tied to ease of doing business. Ease of doing business is about promptness and predictability. I don't know, I'm sure your driver's license bureaus here are much better than ours in Texas, but I will avoid until the day before my birthday to go get it done, because I dread it so bad, because there is no promptness and there's no predictability of what my day's fixing to be like. I mean, so what happens is when you have an absence of promptness and predictability, people tend to go somewhere else. Does that make sense? So this ease of business is important, but ease of business is not the same thing as lowering standards. If you sell your soul for a Taco Bell, your future will be a whole bunch of Taco Bells. You've got to have the strength to be vision-driven of here's what we're trying to accomplish long-term, even when you're being told you're not listening to the people, you're anti-business, you're going to drive us out of business. I mean, all of that stuff, it gets said everywhere. I love you guys, but you're not special. Every city council hears those same things. On the whys, proactive versus reactive, I love that because if you're not anticipating what's coming, it's real difficult to be prepared for it. Improving the quality of life, that really is back to making the pie bigger. Government moves slowly, so we've got to think long term. That's exactly right. And that's even more significant because the pace of change is accelerating so much. Seeing the new horizons, capacity to think longer term, staff capacity to dedicate to this is absent. In other words, everybody's already stretched too thin, and so what happens is if you just don't ever get it done. Now, Patrick Lencioni actually talks about that in his book, Death by Meeting, and he's really talking to the private sector, but what he focuses on, and he's not talking about the future, but what he says is if an organization doesn't discipline itself to set time aside to think about the long term, you don't ever do it. You're so busy dealing with the daily incoming missile. So he's not talking about a futurist, he's talking about how a team operates, but the principle is the same with time and with money. If you don't devote the resources to it, it doesn't ever happen. You're so busy getting the steel out the door, you can't really think long term. Okay, so then any reactions to those flow of thought kind of responses over there? Okay, so raging success at the forefront of new industry with the pace of innovation that's going on, that has so much just crazy potential. The problem in a political environment and for a political body is the essence of being at the forefront of new industry means you can't really tell what it is. You can't say, oh, we know that 3 years from now, there's going to be a factory that does nothing except produce water-based Roombas. That's the essence of being at the forefront is you don't really know where it's headed yet. Quality of life hub, that's directly related to economic development. If you go back to that issue that we flip-flopped where companies are going where the people are now, your next generation is intensely focused on quality of life. We could spend a whole day talking about nothing except what that means, but the reality is if you are not investing in quality of life stuff, you will not get the graduating students to stay here. They are being drawn to places that are very different than what I was drawn to when I was at that age. Infrastructure can support itself, better understand, seek out, and seize opportunities. I love that. That's a cool way of putting it. A better way to exist in the parameters we've been given. How many of you, all of you remember the old Star Trek TV series? And the whole gist of Star Trek is Captain Kirk, his reputation as this legendary Starfleet commander was all based on the fact that it had its roots that he had been the first Starfleet rookie commander to ever beat the simulator. And so that's the basis of his reputation during the 3 or 4, whatever it was, years it was on TV. And then a few years later, Star Trek 1 came out. That was still the basis of the reputation. And then a few years after that, Star Trek 2, same thing. Star Trek 3. In Star Trek 3, what we discover for the first time ever, his whole reputation and legend had been based on the first guy to beat the simulator. What we find out in Star Trek 3 is he had hacked into the simulator and rewritten the rules of the game. See, what happened is the simulator had been programmed to not be beatable. What Captain Kirk did was change the rules of the game to make it winnable. So when you talk about how do we exist in the parameters we've been given, you're talking about a Captain Kirk move. You're talking about saying, okay, how do we take and rewrite how do we hack into the system and rewrite the rules of the game to make it winnable, because in the existing rules of the game, we are going to continue to decline because we don't have adequate resources to keep up, much less get ahead. Does that make sense? Be the community that students want to stay. We talked about that. Vibrant and strong downtown. Those are absolutely related to each other. More community involvement. That's going to happen no matter what. The question is it going to be constructive or destructive involvement? Recognized on a national level as you take advantage of OSU, et cetera, and an innovation hub. The issue of reputation really does shape who wants to be here. There are communities that are the horse rendering capital of Oklahoma. It's jobs. It's not tax-based because you don't have property tax, but it generates sales tax when they go and get burgers at lunch and whatever. But it's not necessarily what you see as your destiny. Does that make sense? Reputation, it's actually a little bit, somebody mentioned chicken places a minute ago. Restaurants tend to aggregate around other restaurants. If this is a good location, everybody wants to be a part of that location. Communities develop reputations, and what you're known for is what you will tend to draw more of. So the beauty of everything you've said is there's actually an awful lot of synergy in what you've described, because the reality is traditional economic growth, high-tech growth, the university dynamic, healthcare, all of those actually are pretty aligned in terms of what you've described. There's no conflict in the kind of thing you've talked about. So, with all of that said, reactions, thoughts, disagreements. Irresponsible rants. So does this tend so far to make you go, yeah, let's do it, or oh my gosh, let's go to the Dairy Queen?
Can we do it at the Dairy Queen?
That'd be a raging success.
I think it's so exciting to be talking about and brainstorming these opportunities, or this as an opportunity, even just to kind of to dialogue about kind of those hopes and dreams and what ifs and the things that are special about our community. And I know all that's not going to be solved with one position, but just the idea of kind of thinking in a forward direction, and this position being a constantly forward direction thinking position is kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, it's, you made the comment about, there's, the team needs to think forward, right? And I want to be careful about, thinking, oh, if we just hire some person, then all of a sudden we'll be forward thinking. Because I don't think that'll be the case, but building that into this idea of saying, if we can bring a person on the ground who is pushing that, but we're also integrating it into how we're doing things. I mean, it's, I've been doing this for almost 3 years now, and you've been doing it longer than that, and we see, it's so easy to just get so bogged down in what ordinance we passing this week, what problem are we solving for somebody this week, which infrastructure item is broken that we've got to fix. And the idea of getting beyond that, at least, not spending 100% of our time looking at that, but looking at it maybe 80% of the time and focusing 20% over here on what's happening in the future is, I don't think there's any way we cannot do it. I think it's just too important for us to be looking down that road that we can't. We've got to figure out a way to do it, whether it's with hiring a person to do it or some other way, we've got to figure out a way to do it.
I think I'm kind of thinking about what you're saying, it's kind of that step into beginning that baby step process, because you're right, it can't just be one person and it's all the responsibility of that one person and good luck. It has to be a mindset of the entire city staff and city government and council to really keep moving it forward and support that entity so that there's a good balance and there's good dialogue between this position and the day-to-day thing so that it meshes.
Because those things still do have to get done.
Exactly.
So what do you see, assume you hire a person, what do you see them actually doing? What are they going to spend their time doing?
I think I'd want them to be active in the community. I think that you can't think forward if you don't know what the community is.
And then I think expand out from that and have the opportunity to be active in a wider area. Like to have a pulse on, I know we've kind of talked about trends and about opportunities, but to have a pulse on national opportunities and regional opportunities and regional trends and national trends to kind of see, not everything is, you can take it from a community and bring it here and it'll work, but are there things other places are doing or conversations other communities are having that we can integrate into the conversations that we're having here, and having the ability to move in some of those circles, I think is really important.
Well, I think, kind of going along with both of those comments, Will, going back to what you said, it's not like we hire this person and all of this stuff gets done. It's going to take a large team effort, but that's got to be spearheaded somewhere. So I think that the term that kind of encompasses all of that is spreading that culture, not only among the staff, but being active in the community and getting people excited about forward thinking and moving some of these projects forward. Because it's going to, you can hire somebody and do that, do the operations stuff, but what we're really kind of talking about is spreading a pervasive culture of thinking down the road. So I think one of the things that person would do would be to spread that culture.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, and you sort of, in saying that, I know just in conversations I have regularly with staff, existing staff, that it's not that this stuff isn't being thought about, with the folks we have. It's a matter of giving them the time and the space and the opportunities to kind of, in their own different areas, to say, yeah, I've actually been thinking about the future a lot, about this specific area, and we just don't have time to deal with it, or here's what needs to happen. So as part of that kind of building a culture of, but enabling current staff to
They have a voice.
to do, to act on some of that stuff that they're maybe not able to at this point.
And somebody that can kind of stitch together. I think one thing our staff does really well is you guys talk with each other really well. It's not like you're in these silos of departments, but having somebody that can really kind of swim around those departments and start to stitch together, like we're thinking about this over here in transportation, and we're thinking about this, those might marry together in this really cool, innovative way. Let's work on that, kind of an opportunity to, kind of marry some of those ideas that staff has or doesn't maybe have the time to do on their own.
Okay. What else?
Just some very more specific sort of thinking about it. Someone who is giving from a council standpoint, who's helping us with, here's what we see an impact being 3, 4, 5 years down the road from this, new legislative action that the state's taken, or, I mean, it's hard enough for us to just kind of keep up with, when our staff comes and gives a report about what's happening, we have to make that decision. It would be nice for someone to be able to come in and say, here's where this is going, or here's where the legislature is moving, or, to give us a little bit more
This big
Okay.
help
picture.
with big picture and future trends.
Gary, I'm going to ask you to share with them. Gary's done a ton of homework on this, a lot of research, talked to institutes and futurists literally all over the U.S. trying to get a handle on stuff. Give them a little sense of that operational unit thing. When you ask the question, okay, what does it really take, to share with them kind of what you encountered.
Okay. Well, whenever Norm called me and told me that you were interested in pursuing this, and we kind of drifted off into, well, we're not really sure. I set about trying to contact organizations that actually were devoted to this kind of thing. And there are some that they're very nationally oriented and they have a big membership, but they warned me that the people that are involved in those organizations, by and large, are people that just want to kind of touch base with that kind of thinking, but they're not the people that actually know how to do the work. They indicated to me that there are about 20% of the membership in this American Futurists Association that actually know what the methodology is in pursuing a program like what we're talking about doing. But I did find that there are university programs, master's level programs, where people come out of that degree program with a background in how to actually utilize this methodology to move a program forward. I talked to some that actually do this for a living, and the people that they're working for, some you've heard of, some you haven't. But Disney, for example, has a futurist that he actually decided he wanted to leave there and go to Minnesota, which I'm like, why? But I said to him, what do you feel like the city of Stillwater would need to do from a budgetary standpoint to position themselves to be able to actually recruit somebody like this? And I guess compensation-wise, they told me anywhere from, depending on who you're talking to, anywhere from $80,000 a year to $170,000 a year. But these people, they work in the private sector or work for the private sector for the most part. A lot of these organizations, they actually are simply consultants. They work on a short-term basis with big organizations to pursue a program like this, but in areas that we've talked about, they would actually be charged with doing some of that ground level research, and would have, one of them indicated to me that they would really need to have some solid quantitative skills, which makes a lot of sense to me, that you really need to have some solid data to go with whatever it is that they're telling you, that will give you some level of confidence that if you decide to move policy in that direction, that it's grounded in. Yeah, it's backed up. So I'll tell you that the recruiting that I do, for the most part, will get anywhere from 25, 50, 100 applications for the jobs that I typically recruit for. My sense is that it's not going to be, those numbers are not going to be there if you start trying to recruit a person that's actually trained and experienced in doing this kind of work. Which kind of as we were talking, one of the questions that comes to my mind, having done work in the public sector for a long time, is that it would seem to me that this kind of a situation is going to require a long-term commitment on the part of the city. But as we all know, city councils change, and you're looking at budgetary issues from one year to the next. So I guess one of the questions I would have is, have you thought about how you ensure that this is something that isn't going to be discarded within a few years before you're able to really start generating that solid information that you need? So that's a question. I don't know whether you've kind of thrown that around before or not, but faces on a city council will change, and the ones that are here now are very solidly interested in doing this, but somebody later on may not be. So that's kind of on that, why don't we do it?
So tell me if I miss anything. My summary of your Do It Right research, you've got to be prepared for long-term stability. You're looking at probably anywhere from 80 to 180K in salary, depending on level of experience, background, et cetera. And you probably need 2 to 3 researchers to do it, if you're going to do it right.
One of the questions I had for him was, do you feel like it makes sense that the city might have access to people at the university that might be able to, not necessarily on a permanent basis, but on some kind of a consultative basis, be a resource for somebody that you have here? And they said that essentially it would depend on who you're talking to at the university. Some are very, what they do is very well defined, and they don't really, get outside of those lanes very much, but there may be others that do. And the other question I had was, does it make sense that you might have student interns that could be available to work in this capacity? And one of them said, yeah, I think that, I could actually train people like that to do what I would need done in order to generate that solid base of information that you need to make decisions.
So that research is based on this futurist sort of job title, which I'm not even sure I really understand what that is, and I'm not really, I don't know that we're necessarily married to the idea that it has to be someone of that specific training and in terms of you guys' experience around public entities, what is, there aren't a lot of public entities with a futurist on staff, but who's doing this general type of work on public entity staffs now?
You've got 2 or 3 different buckets of stuff that's going on out there. One terminology that you will hear is chief learning officer, or not chief knowledge officer. They will typically come out of the IT realm, but not limited to IT. They will tend to be very focused on innovation, but everything from an IT sort of slant. The second one you've got are just innovation officers. That's probably the most common scenario that you have out there. It tends to be, I would characterize the innovation officers most often as near-term innovation instead of the new horizon stuff. It's how do we work smarter? It is more culture. You see a lot more focus on culture with those folks than you do with the chief knowledge officers. And any of these are not perfectly clean buckets. I'm doing some generalizing. But you'll see that a lot of the time. And then what you'll see a lot of is a assistant to the city manager role that is just sort of the utility infielder, that innovation and innovative thinking is kind of one more thing in their bucket. And dependent upon the individual, that may be significant or maybe not. Even with all of those variations, I would say it's less than 10% of the cities that have any of the variations. I am not, and you've done more research specifically on futurists, is there anybody that you came across that specifically has a futurist on staff?
Not in the US, I didn't find.
Yeah.
And you already know this, but Canada has those kinds of people working there. I got the job description from Pat Darlington from, I guess, Regina. But quite honestly, it was so broad, and
Yeah.
I'm like, whoa. What is this?
And I think for us, it came out of when our assistant city manager left, and you got, staff kind of pulled a different role for assistant city manager with our chief financial officer and everything, and it was kind of like, oh, well, could we do something with an assistant or deputy or that kind of person, but have them kind of give them the room and space and responsibility to kind of be this broader thinking.
Here's your limitation with that. And I'm absolutely not saying it's impossible, but your limitation in a scarce resource environment is that you tend to fight the biggest fires on a daily basis, and you never get, it's the Patrick Lencioni deal, that if you don't go off site once a quarter to just think, you don't ever just think. You just stay focused on dealing with the...
I think that would be my concern, is if we pulled them into that title of a role, that it would be just natural tendency to help us put out fires.
Yeah.
That kind of, it's just human nature, right? So my concern with when that space kind of, I feel very comfortable with how we've handled that transition. I think as we were talking, we thought, well, maybe that's an opportunity. That's a person that was here that, is not here anymore, and, could we do something with another person in a different titled role, in a more specifically kind of defined.
And let me caution what some cities say they do, but they confuse it. This is not a planning person. This is not a land use planning. That's a whole different creature, but you have a lot of cities don't do this, but think they do it because they have a long-term planning person. Long-term planning is about starting where you are and incrementally forward from where you are. Futurist is about starting where the world might go and figure out how to back up from there to where we are and to build a bridge. Does that make sense? Those are two way different disciplines.
Let me just ask Gary a question. Does what you've heard in here today more fit this futurist description that you have found, or the people that work in the private industry and that? Does it kind of fit what you've heard in here today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, yeah.
Yeah, in fact, that's a great question, Norm, and it very much, you guys are thinking at that new horizon level. I'm not, even though I just put that caution out there, that was more about what I see happening in other cities, not what I'm hearing out of you. What I'm hearing out of you is very much, how do we really think?
My concern with that, though, would be, right? You'd have to have some knowledge of local government to understand how you would integrate. It seems like pulling somebody that, I don't know, it would have to be, I feel like there are people, and I don't know what title or what their backgrounds are, but there's people as you go through local governments that do this, not because it's their title or, they're just really good at this kind of forward thinking, kind of moving the ship. And then there's people that are really good, you know, I mean, there's good administrators out there, there's good,
And,
you know.
yeah, and that's a great observation. And so here's the dilemma you get a little bit. Really, really great futurists are spending their time thinking, not doing. They are, so let's take the transportation modes, different modes of transportation. If you say, we want to understand that, I don't think you really want a futurist going, okay, how practical is it? How do we get the public support for it? All of that stuff, you're losing what they need to be doing is saying, here's where the world's headed. Here's where the technology is headed. And then I think to your point, it's a different discipline to say, how do we harness that internally? In other words, as they get further down the road, they're going to develop more familiarity with local government, but I don't think you're going to find a true futurist with all of that practical understanding. I think they're different. I think they're substantially different disciplines. And they're not going to, it's almost the, let me use a different example. The first futurist I ever had any encounter with was a guy named Jim Krupe. Jim lived in Plano back when I was ACM there, and I provided support to the Plano 2020 Commission, which at that time was a long ways in the future. This was back in the 80s. And Jim was one of the appointees. Well, Jim actually was one of the early guys that consulted with the U.S. Army on asymmetrical warfare. So what he was doing was not telling them, here's what you need to do to deal with it, but he was saying, you need to get ready because all of the rules of warfare are changing. This is the role technology is going to have. This is the role tribalism is going to have. This is the role that globalism is going. In other words, there's all these things that he's studying the trends of where it's headed, but he wasn't trying to go into the Army and say, okay, here's what you need to do differently to respond to it. What he's doing is saying, here's the stuff you need to know that's happening that you need to be able to respond to. Does that make sense?
It does. I wonder and worry if we need to have like somebody that can have a foot in both spaces. It just seems hard to like, how do you, if you don't have somebody that has a foot in both spaces, how do you bridge that to an actionable thing? So
let me go back to what the mayor said earlier. You said something to the effect of, and this isn't an exact quote, and I know you're used to being misquoted, so I'm not going to worry about it. You said something to the effect of whether this is an employee or whether it's some other variation, whether it's a full-time person or some other variation. Go a little deeper with what, was there anything in particular percolating in the back of your mind there, or was that just a throwaway line? Like, I love kittens during campaign season.
I love kittens all the time. I don't know that I was getting into a distinction between a full-time employee and some other type of person there, but I agree with your, I think I was trying to make that point of a person who is a futurist is probably going to be more on the academic side of things and not necessarily an implementer. And that, to Amy's point, finding someone who understands that and is following those people and reads those people, but also has the implementation skill set is really, I think, what we're trying to find here. Maybe it's just somebody who knows the world of what those futurists are talking about, but doesn't necessarily live in that world. Maybe it is, we need to just bring somebody in on a periodic basis to kind of give us the what's the world look like in 20 years kind of thought. But I still think we need the implementer at some level, or somebody, here who is tasked with saying, here's what's going on, here's what people are talking about future-wise, here's how we can kind of help start to move that way.
And here I have some time designated to me as an individual to help move that ball forward.
If I can chime in here for a second, a long time ago, in 1984, I was at the FBI Academy, and there was a fellow there named Tafoya. I mentioned this to the first meeting. And he was their first futurist. And his material's still on the internet. If you look it up, he was scary good at looking into the future and saying, here's what's going to happen. Well, what the staff at the academy did was take his, because most of the people that attend are future law enforcement administrators, leaders, et cetera. Here's what you can expect, and this is what you're going to have to deal with in the future. So the implementation was making the foot soldiers, if you will, aware of what they think the future is going to hold. You have to be prepared to deal with it. And I don't know if that helps.
So you feel like just the knowledge base, having somebody that could bring that knowledge base there was benefit and value?
Well, I think so, and I think that information in the hands of both staff and the council would give us an actionable plan. I mean, this fella very, it's not a pleasant topic, but he very, very clearly articulated civil riots and disturbances around the country, and when they'd be, where they would be, and what would precipitate them. And that did allow some prior planning. Larger police departments where they were expecting that kind of activity. And he predicted their spread and how it would spread.
What's he doing now? Is he available?
So it's almost like we would work with a futurist or someone that would get, and then maybe the individual we're thinking of then would actually, because I guess I think if someone says this is what's going to happen, how's that going to change your day-to-day? Do we need someone that will actually help city staff think about ways to help? I mean,
like pull that into a practical example. So let's take transportation. It's a little more concrete of an idea, right? So if not that Stillwater is gonna, all of a sudden become, we're gonna have streetcars or something, right? A big metropolis that needs all these different, I don't know, but let's take transportation. So if we're thinking down the road, that there is an opportunity with some sort of alternative transportation, whether it be a streetcar or something like that, or self-driving buses or something like that. If we have somebody that says this is coming, like we could capitalize on that here in Stillwater. But if they just come to you and say that, what does that do for our staff? As opposed to somebody that says, this is coming, I found some grant opportunities to bring in to build this out. I found some different people that I can build or start to build the basis of an actionable, this is coming, as opposed to, here guys, this is coming. I want you to think about it, good luck.
Yeah.
I think that's what I feel like we're starting to pile as opposed to help you guys all of a sudden.
So-
I don't know, maybe not.
No, today there was an article in one of the things I read every morning, and what are you going to do with your parking lots in the future when you don't need them anymore? And it gets you thinking, well, there's more developable land and some pretty prime real estate. I think there are some things that a futurist type can come in and say. It just doesn't, in the daily fires, it doesn't occur to you.
Right.
And when somebody says, you need to think about what you're going to do with your parking lots, it's like, Why
Right,
didn't I
and
think
that
of
knowledge, you could walk into a next meeting and somebody might be talking about a parking lot that's gonna go, you know, I mean, like, that knowledge actually, yeah, right,
Well, and
there's
do we
value.
need to be looking at developing a lot of market based on the technology that's coming? If you have a large development, do you build for now? Do you build for the future? Do you know, there's some things that you need to think about. I think it could be helpful when one of your concerns is if this person would be tasked with putting out fires. If the council says this person's job is this, that's what they're gonna do.
So my wheels are just spinning about how to create synergy with all of this stuff. Let me do a quick flashback. The first time I ever came to Stillwater was back in the 90s when I was working with a group called the Innovation Groups. Stillwater was a member of the Innovation Groups. This was basically pre-internet days, in terms at least mainstream internet. And what the Innovation Groups did was they were a membership-based organization of cities that basically did product testing. Now this was, I remember when I was in Plano, one of the products they brought was some globules that you planted when you planted trees, and they absorbed water, and then it was slow release. So this was not technology stuff, it was any new product. But it raises a question in my mind. Here's what I hear you saying. What I think I hear you saying. So let's assume, and I'm doing outer limits, okay? Let's assume that you're talking top-end player, so with salary and benefits, you're talking $200K if you get a really heavy duty. Now we know we can get them half that, but just as beginning point. Then if you've got 2 to 3 researchers, those are probably, if they're full-time, $50K a year, my guess is. So you got another $150K. Then you've got an operating budget of probably $100K. Then you've got the implementation issue, and let's say another $50K. So you're looking $2, $3, $450, $500,000 in quick and dirty numbers for Cadillac level. Does that make sense? And I Cadillac level. What I think I hear you saying by default is Cadillac level is not very practical. Now, I may be wrong about that, but I hear you keep coming back to a single person instead of a full-blown operation. Is that a fair description? So that then leads the question, back where I started, and it's riding the horse that the mayor raised a minute ago. What if the issue is not that you try to fully fund all of this on your own? What if the issue is that Stillwater becomes the anchor for a municipal futurist institute in partnership here with OSU that then begins to feed some of these other sorts of things, and you begin to think more, you don't think we can't afford to do it right, so we're only going to do a little piece of it. We can't afford to get to level A, so we're just going to do it at level D. What if you pull a Captain Kirk and redefine? Does that make sense? Rewrite the rules of the game and go, okay, let's get out of our other box. And I'm not saying, I'd love for you guys to fund $500,000, but what I keep hearing, the conversation goes down to the smallest common denominator. Does that make sense? Reactions.
But what if the ROI on that in 5 years is a $100 million development?
I think it can be. So all right, now I appreciate. No, so let me give you a little. I'm a risk taker. So I'm trying to not let my excitement of what you're doing go nuts. I think anything you do here it's back to the question, is it making the pie bigger? So I think you're absolutely right. The potential impact of this is huge.
Well, I do think too, I mean, with the university as a resource, I mean, even just like, look at things that Tulsa's done with community volunteers in terms of data-driven decision-making. I mean, the community is gathering data. They have volunteers gathering data, and they're making municipal decisions based on those data that community members are gathering.
But you've got to have the infrastructure in place to even organize the volunteers.
Sure. I mean, but if you have an intern coming over from the university from a quantitative perspective, if we really feel like data and that quantitative analysis of data and information is important to this space, I mean, we could maybe reduce the cost associated with that by using our capital, our student capital that we have here.
Okay. Question. The question ultimately is, how bold are we? We can narrow down the risk, but they tend to narrow down the reward.
Yeah, so, I mean, from listening to all this, we have the option or the opportunity to say, let's go build a from scratch, new to everyone, totally unique municipal futurist department in Stillwater for $500,000 a year, or some smaller version of that at whatever level it is, or we try to outsource it some way. We figure out how do we just bring it in every once in a while. How do we get OSU to do it for us? And those seem like the options. You're sort of in the research and saying, hey, if you guys want to do this, this is the way to do it. You either go all out this way or you figure out some other option. Again, I think I go back to our discussions originally around this and go, I was just kind of talking about somebody. I mean, I love this. I would love for us to figure out a way to bring some of this stuff in, but.
Yeah, you've definitely expanded.
And that's my only goal today, is to just, force you to think so that you
We knew what to think. We didn't know what to, I think that's why we're having this
Yes.
conversation.
Yeah.
We didn't know what the realm of all this could include. So this does help. So.
And the cool thing is, the reason you didn't know that is because you're plowing new territory, not just in Stillwater, but nationally with municipalities. That's a cool thing. So don't let that be a negative that you didn't know what to think. That's a cool thing that you said, let's go wander into this new territory and let's see what it looks like.
I don't know if we thought we were being that cutting edge.
No, you're bleeding edge.
So what is the next, what would you say is our next step in this process?
I think your real next step is to just percolate a little bit on all of it. And I think you've got two kinds of forks in the road. One is, are you really looking for a futurist, or are you really looking for a process improvement / innovation kind of person? The difference is the innovation focus tends to, in practical terms, tends to be shorter term. So you're saying, how do we get better at? The futurist tends to be, what's coming down the road that we don't even know what the question is yet? Does that make sense? That's fork in the road number one. So if you say we want to go the innovation route, we can ratchet that up and we can bring you some great choices, and it's a good thing. I'm not at all being negative. If you decide you want to go the futurist route, then I think you've got about 3 different options. Option 1 is, I'm going to just call it the Cadillac model, that says, okay, if we're going to do it, if we don't think this is going to pay big returns, we shouldn't be doing it in the first place. If it's going to pay big returns, we got to do it right. That's Cadillac level. Next option is to skinny that down at some point. The most extreme skinny down version is 1 single person early career. So instead of a 200K person, it's a 100K salary and benefits, give or take. And then probably 25 or 30 grand in operating costs, kind of thing. So I mean, you dramatically reduce the cost at the other, and then there's obviously gradations in between. Your third option is to say, okay, how do we turn this into a collaborative effort in some form or fashion, a la what the innovation groups used to be, et cetera. And then once you've chosen that pathway, then I think the next step is to go deeper. So let's say where I think your thinking was, at least based on bits and pieces, was that middle option. We're really talking about hiring a person with a little operational expense, and you say, Gary, we need you to go find that person for us. That's very simple, straightforward, clean. You know, if that's the pathway, man, we can rock and roll. If you say, we really want to go all in, I think you need to spend at a staff more time saying, okay, what are those, I mean, me flying seat of my pants and plugging numbers up here on, those are not highly reliable. Staff needs to look at it and say, okay, what would an operating budget actually look like? How much do we really need? Which positions, what do we really need them to be? To what extent are we willing to, rely on interns or whatever? And then you do the same thing once you've kind of said, okay, we're ready to put that into next year's budget. Then you say, Gary, this is what we're looking for. And again, that could be anywhere from that 100K package to the 200K, depending on experience. The model could still be the same. And then the third is, okay, we think looking at doing this as some sort of a collaborative base is the way to do it. That, I think, actually needs more thoughtful, whether you said, okay, SGR, we want to figure out how to collaborate with y'all, whether you go to OSU, say we want to do it that way, whether a nonprofit is set up and you guys simply say, we commit that we'll be a member of it. I mean, there's a variety, there's a whole array of options there in how something like that would come out.
What do you think the participation rate might be in this part of the country in a collaborative effort of municipalities? Bearing in mind that we got out of OML last year for a variety of reasons.
I think your Oklahoma participation may be 3 or 4 cities. I think what you're doing, though, is so innovative and so gee whiz. I wouldn't think in terms of Oklahoma. I would think in terms of nationally. Because and let me go back and use the innovation. That's my only frame of reference. The innovation groups had about 500 members nationwide that, depending on size of city, were contributing anywhere from $2,500 to $7,500 a year for membership. And so I've seen cities being willing to pony up pretty good chunks of change for something they believe in. Now, it started slow. You didn't have 500 on day one who said, "Oh yeah, we'll," but it did build up.
Well, so what would the National League or those organizations think of such a thing? I mean, would they get behind something like that?
No. No, because in one sense it
Legislative focused.
Yeah, and it's just not in their footprint. I mean, it's not that they're going to fight it. It's just irrelevant to them. But I think a lot of the cities, everybody knows we've got so many issues. There's a lot of platforms on fire right now. And a lot of the burning platforms, nobody knows what to do with that platform. And so you've got just the transportation issue. So Uber is now partnering, I think it was with Google, with the driverless cars. Well, if the only thing that happens is Uber starts running driverless cars, just that one thing that they're already on the pathway begins to change a whole bunch of rules of everything.
And Ford just spent $14 billion.
Absolutely. So those sorts of things, the thinking cities realize that has huge implications for your parking lot issue. I travel. I slept in my own bed like 6 nights in the last 30 days or the 30 days before Thanksgiving. So I travel all the time. I don't ever take a car to DFW Airport anymore. I always take Uber. So I don't park. Well, there's a whole bunch of me's out there doing that, which changes how much money they're going to be spending on parking in the future. So when you go back to your example a minute ago, Norm, of what do we do with what do we require with grocery stores on parking? Does that change? The ripple implications are massive, which is why I haven't had the conversations, but I think cities would respond well to say, yeah, I'm willing to kick in $5 or $10 grand a year to be a part of something that there's a strong team in place to really start studying where the world's headed.
I feel like too, so many decisions are being, at the local level, we have such an opportunity. It's so much easier to make some of the decisions that maybe we used to rely on the state or federal levels to kind of make those decisions. They need to be happening more on the ground with us at a local level. I mean,
Yeah, we're being so preempted by the state and federal. John and I spent yesterday working on.
but I feel like when it comes down to some of the bigger problems, they will be solved in bite-sized pieces by our municipalities.
Oh, I agree, and I vehemently disagree with the preemptive nature of both state and federal governments, but that's also an issue that's going to continue in the future
Yeah.
because of the lobbying efforts of these massive corporations.
Right, but finding a way to get those boots on the ground, I think here with us is kind of, it's kind of a neat idea to think about maybe tying other folks in.
Yeah, the one concern that I would have with that coalition is that, frankly, this comes from experience in policing organizations. Major cities take it over.
The experience with and I agree with that in a lot of the associations, the vast majority. The trick is, and what happened with the innovation groups, is it's how you develop that initial charter, on how board members are selected, et cetera. And I think there's some control. We did not have that problem with the innovation groups. But part of it was also because with the innovation groups, everybody was drawn to it because they were excited about the culture of innovation. It was intellectually had people jazzed up, so it was a different kind of dynamic than you have. A lot of your battles in your police associations and municipal leagues, you've got political battles over what position you're going to take with the legislature. The interests divert.
That's what caused our department.
But with this, I don't see that as a high probability because it's not about advancing an agenda, it's about advancing understanding.
But it could dilute implementation for us specifically, right? I mean, if we were thinking in terms of support for implementation of some of these new horizon concepts,
You're right.
do it that way.
Absolutely.
It dilutes the ability to implement here in Stillwater.
Well, because there's going to be an aspect unique about every community. You got 16 public power kind of.
We just spent time talking about those things that are unique to us, and we would no longer have somebody that was focused on it. on us.
I'm not saying it couldn't work, but it would be.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's,
Think about.
yeah, so that's what I would urge. You do some percolating. You know, I know this has been like drinking out of a fire hydrant today, but just do some percolating and think about those couple of forks in the road. Come back to, why are we doing this? What is our, and then figure out what's doable, what's the best way, reasonable way to make it happen. And the ideal is it's just, to be honest with you, it's just like going into a business venture. If I'm going to go open a donut shop and I've got the capital to do it all myself and not take on any partners or anything, that's a whole lot better way to do it, but I'm carrying more of the risk. With the dilution of risk comes dilution of control.
So is there another model where we implement the Cadillac option and sell that information? Basically sell the information.
Actually, I think there could be. So, I think you've got two levels. So, and I'm making this up as I'm sitting here, Norm. I hadn't thought about it. But what you've got is you've really got two kinds of information. You've got generic information, and then you've got consulting or customized. So if you go in, and the dilution factor for you is, if you're trying to produce the stuff that'll sell, it may not be as focused on your needs. The more you focus on your needs, the smaller the market is. So what you would want to do is really think through. So we know the transportation issue is affecting everybody. I think if you took and did really great work with that Cadillac option, and I would probably do a two-stage sort of thing. One is you're producing a written report that can be sold, but then you've got this person or one of these people that's actually able to go out and present it. So you go to Plano and say, Plano, we've done all of this research, and I'm making numbers up, for $5,000, we'll come in and we'll present to you state-of-the-art thinking, all of this research, blah, blah, blah. I actually think you could, Norm, turn it into a revenue generator. Now, the revenue's going to do like this, not like this. So you've got to be prepared to grow into it, because nobody's got a frame of reference for what you're doing. But I actually, my gut says that, yeah, because what I know, here's what I absolutely know. The context is a little different for you guys, but the issues are actually the same nationwide. So when you're wrestling with downtown renovation, when you're wrestling with how do we get people want to stay here, young families to stay, when you're dealing with quality of life, all of those issues, the context is a little different. But when you're studying the future, they're not studying Stillwater. You're not asking for them to do a transportation plan on Stillwater streets. You're wanting them to study what's happening with technology that we then need to plan for on Stillwater streets. Does that make sense? So the product actually, if you approach it from the beginning with a broad mindset, so that you know you're actually producing a product to sell, my gut says there's demand for that. And I would even tell you, whether you did it yourself or we worked with you, we do an annual conference on servant leadership. We'll have 400 city officials coming in. You know, it's a $120,000 a year event, all said. Now, there's a lot of expenses in that, but so I think, again, this is so cool. I could see you and OSU hosting a 2-day futures forum. This is this year's study stuff. It's kind of like the Mary Meeker's state of the internet. There's a report that gets done every year by somebody named Mary Meeker, who I'd never heard of until she started doing the PowerPoint every year, but it's about 150 or 200 slide deck every year, and it in corporate America is like the gold standard where the internet is headed. So it's very narrowly focused, etc. I think people would get jazzed up to send people to that kind of an annual event that's basically you presenting, here's the stuff we've studied this year. Here's the leading thinking. So all of that long-winded to say, I actually do think that has a possibility.
This went a whole different direction. That's good. New directions are good. Lot to think about, lot to figure out from our standpoint there. Anything else we need to talk about today before we start thinking about all that?
I don't think so. I think just don't get in a box. Just think, always come back to what are we really trying to accomplish, and then figure out what's the best way to get to where we want to get to. Let that be your your guiding light. What are we trying to accomplish?
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Appreciate your time today.
Our pleasure.
I would like to publicly thank Gary and Ron that they normally have a charge for this. They're so interested in the concept.
Absolutely.
Volunteered to come.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gratis to visit with us about this.
I meant it when I said I think you guys are doing some of this is over the top, way cool. I am blown away with your level of thinking. It's way cool. Whatever path you choose, it is way cool what you're doing.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it. Stay healthy. Good.
There's water and cookies over there.
Do we need a motion to adjourn?
Sorry.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn.
Mayor Joyce,
Yes.
Councilor Zanotti,
Yes.
Councilor Wedlake,
Yep.
Councilor Jaloski.
Yes.
Mayor, that passed 4-0.
4-0, we're adjourned.